Hi everyone, and welcome back to Tech Tactics Live. It's our 16th episode, and we're here in PCA's garage. I'm taking a look at my phone here, and I think we are close to 160 people at the start of the show, which is a record for us. So to everyone that's here tonight, thank you for joining us. And thank you for joining us tonight, as opposed to last Wednesday, where YouTube had a glitch in their system and they weren't streaming live videos. So we opted to switch it out for this week. And I'm glad that you guys all came, and it's great to have you. We have a great show lined up for you tonight. We're going to be, of course, talking about Porsche values in 2020, what's hot, what's not. If you would, before we get into the meat of it all, please like, subscribe, and comment. That helps us out with our algorithms and such. We do have prizes as usual. It's starting to be a tradition with Tech Tactics Live. We have 2 lights that are going to be available for 2 winners tonight. So make sure you put in your name and region, where you're from, by 8:20. We will pick random winners and we will announce during the show as well. So let's get to it. We've only got about an hour, and I know it's going to go by very quickly because we have an amazing guest with us tonight. You've seen him before. This is the first guest we've had on Tech Tactics Live that's been here, that will have been here twice. And that is Nathan Merz of Columbia Valley Luxury Cars. And he is not only the owner of that organization, but he also is a contributor to Porsche Panorama. He is on the PCA technical committee with regards to valuations. He comes to our standard Tech Tactics and gives presentations that are typically standing room only. And he's just an all-around great guy. I'm looking this way because my monitor's over there. You know, we often refer to each other as brothers from a different mother because we think alike. We're pretty close. And so, Nathan, welcome. Thanks for being here tonight.
Well, thanks for having me, Vu. I actually feel good. I almost put that same PCA shirt you're wearing on, so thank God I didn't. I've got my Tech Tactics shirt on, so we're ready to talk Porsche values here.
Well, that would have been perfect because, like I said, we're brothers. So let's quickly pull up the agenda and just let people know what we're going to be working through and some things for them to think about as they plan to participate in the show as they're watching it. So, of course, we're going to go through the 2020 market conditions for Porsches. We're going to talk about what you've coined as tweener Porsche models, Porsches to watch, and then we're going to do a fun thing called the speed round. What would you buy? So for those of you that are watching tonight, think about what you would buy with a $25,000 budget, a $50,000 budget, 75, and over 100K. And so towards the end of the show, we're going to do a speed round where Nathan's going to give his selection for each price point, and I'm going to give mine. And certainly we're going to hear, we would love to see and hear what you would like, and we'll talk about all our picks. So if that looks good to you, Nathan, let's talk about 2020 and Porsche values. But wait, before you jump on that, let me just say for those that are watching, never buy your Porsche simply because of the value that it's at or the value that it might be, right? Nathan will talk about this later on. You should buy your Porsche because you love it, and if it happens to retain value and so on and so forth, that's kind of just icing on the cake. So, and the other thing is, I know some people have talked about hopefully getting us to talk about the value of your specific car. It's kind of hard to do, without seeing the car in person. We'll give you some general meters and numbers. So Nathan, is that a good sort of first couple of things to consider before we get into the market?
No, it's great, Vu. Actually, one of the things I'm happy you touched on that. Because I'm an expert on valuations, I get a lot of people that use these words investment or how am I going to make money? And I always say, whoa, hold on right there. I buy and sell and talk and dream and work and kind of live Porsche because I love the brand. And if we woke up tomorrow and they were not the coolest car on the block anymore and the values dropped, I wouldn't sell my cars. I'm still here because I love the experience of cars and the brand and the people. So it's kind of a touchy subject for me. So certainly we talk about values. I always think about, it's always nice if I buy a car and I don't lose money on it. That's good. But I always say if I go on a nice date with my wife and we have a nice meal or go to the movies, I don't get my money back either. I had a great experience. And so if we can enjoy these cars and if it costs us some money, so be it. So kind of a general thing. But let's jump right into the market. I get a lot of questions from people. They say, well, we're in a crazy year. 2020 is a year that a lot of people hope in the future we just wipe out of the history books, right? Between a global pandemic, social unrest, insane election year, economic uncertainty, this will go down in history as one of the most, we'll call it interesting years. And so a lot of people would assume whenever you have chaos, that affects the market negatively in some fashion. So the general assumption would be, well, people are uncertain about their jobs, they're uncertain about if they're a small business owner, certain segments of the economy are highly affected. And so the general thought would be, well, of course, collector cars or expensive cars would be down because they're kind of an extravagance, if you will. Well, sadly and weirdly, nothing could be farther from the truth. The market in every segment of Porsche, this is late model Porsche, new Porsche, old Porsche, collectible Porsche, driver Porsche, you name it. If it's a Porsche, the market is good for it right now, which we could have prognostications about if that's gonna hold up long term. But as of, I guess today is Wednesday, the 18th of November, 2020, the market is hot.
Well, and I think that's sort of what we should be so appreciative. The brand that we love happens to be able to weather some pretty difficult times. Like I think back to '08 when the dot-com bubble burst and housing and all that kind of stuff. Even the club and Porsche's prices were still stable and people were still driving the cars, they're still enjoying them. And fast forward to 2020, they're holding out, and it's pretty awesome. But again, as you said, it's the experience, and that's what you should be focusing on, and not just the value of the car.
Absolutely. So, but again, it's interesting because if you look at the overall market, the market for what I'll consider luxury goods, which I think most of us would put Porsche in, is good. So if you're selling boats, RVs, watches, vacation homes, all that stuff is doing well in the market right now. So Porsche kind of fits in with that. The overall collector car market, if we strip out just Porsche, is doing well, as is sort of the new car market. So it's sort of a weird time. But there are still some things in our space that are really interesting to talk about in terms of depending on which model you have. There is sort of a demographic shift happening right now, which is sort of an interesting change. If we look at historically who has owned Porsche, it skews a little bit older simply because of the price of entry. So most people were not in an economic situation in their teens and 20s to have a Porsche, or if they did, it may have been a more entry-level model. And as they've moved up through the ranks, or their company has grown, or they've had increased economic success, they've been able to upgrade or move along the continuum. And then obviously at some point, people generally phase out of a period of life where they're collecting less, and maybe they're dispersing a collection or they're driving, no longer driving. And so we're seeing kind of some of that stuff happening in the market. And each age group has different preferences. Not universal, but certainly trends that we can look at and see. So I'll give you just a really good example of that. I'm 45 years old. I was born in 1975, but I'm enough of a car nerd that I know that the mid 1970s kind of spelled the end of the convertible era. There was this idea that convertibles were going to go away. They were no longer going to be safe, and they weren't on the road. So as a result, growing up, I didn't have an affinity for open cars. There weren't a lot of open cars on the market. Whereas if I reflect on my dad as an example, an open car represented something to him. And so there's this demographic shift happening now where, for example, in the 356 market, the gold standard was any open 356 radically both outperformed in a monetary sense a closed car, but was an easier sell. And now what's interesting is the open cars values are flat or slightly declining, and coupe values are climbing. and the delta in price between the two cars is shrinking, and that just reflects the new buyer pool, if you will.
Sure. So have you seen, I guess, different, across the board, I think values have gone up, but have you seen values accelerate in, say, air cooled versus water cooled or transaxle or anything like that?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's some interesting things that happen. The first phenomena, which is always sort of funny, is, and I can say this because I've literally owned every model that fell into this category. There's always in the Porsche world, I liken us, maybe we're bullies in the schoolyard or something. We always have to have one model that we like to talk bad about, right? So when I was
There's
a
always
young
someone to pick on.
enthusiast, yeah, when I was a young enthusiast, I was blessed enough to work at a Porsche dealer, and I certainly didn't have the net worth I have now, which is not substantial now even, but it's certainly bigger than it was when I was 16, 17 years old. And so my choice of Porsches, and I wanted a 911, was a 1975. And I remember going to events with that car and older members pulling me aside and basically telling me, well, son, it's nice you have this car, but essentially it's junk. You know, it's a 2.7 liter. The headsets are going to break. It's going to cook. It's just a terrible, right? And I used to sort of laugh about that. And I thought, well, I don't think it's a pretty terrible car. I think it's a pretty great car. Well, then came along the 964 in the early 90s, and that became the punching bag for quite some time. If you owned a 964, it's because you couldn't afford a 993, or because you didn't understand the true 911 stopped production in 1989. And then, of course, we came out with the 996, which became the one that everyone said, oh, frying at headlights and cheapy interior, and so on and so forth. And the funny thing is, we fast forward to today's market, and what do people want right now? Well, they love brightly colored mid-years with the narrow hips and the bright deco trim, preferably in a really vibrant color, a 70s color. Right now, they will literally give their left arm for a 964 manual coupe.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
in every case. And interestingly enough, and I'm very thrilled about this, values on good 996s have been coming up. Not a huge amount. They're still a great value, but they're coming up. And interestingly enough, they're starting to close the gap between their values and the values of a 997. And there's some reasons for that, but it's sort of an interesting change. I kind of like to see it. I kind of root for the underdog, if you will. So I actually have a 964 in my collection. I've got a mid-year in my collection and a 996. So maybe I just really like some of these underdogs, if you will.
Yeah, and I think it is funny how you just mentioned there's always something to complain about, and unfortunately, there's one car that someone has to make fun of. But hopefully, it's usually just kind of lighthearted. But I can remember like a 1990 964 because of lack of was it the leaks and the first year 993 that didn't have vario cam or 996 with the lights. Like there's always something, right? And then as years pass, people start to look at the car and go, oh, okay, well, there's a fix for that, or that really wasn't that big of a problem, and they all kind of have their day at some point. So, yeah. So, did you see anything in 2020 that was like, a car that was bought or sold that you just went, oh my gosh, I can't believe that was an unbelievable deal, or that was ridiculous?
Well, it's a good question. Right now, at least in the public space, one advantage I think of 2020 versus 10 or 15 or 20 years ago is that it's a very open and very transparent market. And so the good news about that is, as an average enthusiast, you get to see a lot of these cars sell in a very transparent manner. But it does mean that kind of the secret deals, while they're not unheard of, they're not quite as common. So if you think back, uh, I'm old enough, I used to buy cars out of the classifieds, right? And so I was a newspaper carrier, and I would pick up my Seattle Times and I would flip through each day, and I'd flip to the sections of cars that I liked, which was really Porsche and Volkswagen. And I would look for new cars ads. Well, I was only competing with other people in my Seattle metropolitan market for that car. I wasn't competing with a buyer in Dallas or Tallahassee or Boston. Whereas now, when a car comes online, I'm competing really globally And so if a really unique or really interesting car pops up, well, the market's very efficient. The car will either sell very quickly if it's underpriced, or it will sell for a market correct price if it's exposed. Whereas sometimes in the past, you might be able to pick up a deal just simply because there wasn't much exposure or as much demand for that given product and maybe a smaller market, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know that I've seen any amazing deals. I've certainly seen some on the other side. I've seen some numbers on some cars that have surprised me. I'll give you an example. One of the interesting things that I'm seeing in the market that I didn't think I would see, but I can see a good rationale for it, is I'm seeing really high quality 996 turbos, particularly like X50 cars, manual transmission coupes with low miles, good colors, bringing essentially 997 turbo money. And the reason I didn't think I would see that is the market over the last 10 years has generally radically preferred the 997 in much the same way that the market preferred the 993 over the 964. But what that's saying is that there's a body of people that actually, given both cars side by side, would pick the 996 turbo. Um, and I can make a good case for why that might be. There's sort of a purity of original design. I also think that if we reflect back to when the 996 Turbo debuted in late 2000, that's 20 years ago now. So an 18 or 19-year-old enthusiast now is peak earning years. They're
Mhm.
late 30s, early 40s, and that's the car of their youth that they left it after, right? So it's sort of an interesting thing that we're seeing is some of these cars achieving numbers that have been quite surprising. But I think not altogether crazy, you know.
Well, you know me, and I'm always the bargain hunter. And I've got to say, especially in 2020, bargain hunting is hard because, like you said, there's so much information out there. There's so many places to list a car, and a good car. I'll have 5 different people send me the same link because this car is so amazing, and buyers see the same thing. I think it's definitely a seller's market. If you have a good car, you're going to get good money for it because people see it and they'll recognize that it's a good car. The hidden deals, oh man, it's just, I think it's unless you know of a car that's tucked away that somebody doesn't turn on a computer, they're far and few in between, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think this cuts both ways too. One of the things that I run into all the time is that this is human nature. What people do is they'll go on and look at the market. And I'll give you an example. I was talking to a gentleman who called me this morning who's got an 88 3.2 Carrera Targa, which is a good car, great car. I love 3.2s. And so he starts telling me about the car, that it's been sitting for around 15 years and needs some mechanical attention. And it's got some chips and dings, and it's higher miles, 210,000 miles. And he kind of wanted my advice, and so as it turns out, what he says to me is he says, "Well, I look at them online, and it looks like these things are worth 50 to 70,000, and so I know my needs work, so it's probably 50,000." And it was sort of hard to explain to him. Well, um, if the car were running and driving and turnkey, even in today's sort of heated market, it's probably worth 35. And it probably needs a minimum of $10,000 to get there. So, but sometimes they get a number in their head, and it's hard to get them off that number as well. So that
Well,
can create
let's
its own challenge.
let's talk about the term you coined, the tweener Porsche models.
Yeah. So this is an absolute term I just sort of came up with, and what do I mean by a tweener? Well, in the Porsche world, the best way I describe it, and this is just based on being in this world for 30 years and talking to a lot of people, is that most people kind of plant themselves somewhere in, I call it the Porsche space. Well, what does that mean? Well, some people view themselves as, oh, I'm an air cooled person, or I'm a transaxle gal, or I like the mid engine cars, or they're a new Porsche buyer, right? There are some enthusiasts, I would put myself in this camp that, I have a kind of a array of Porsches across all generations and styles, but most people primarily put themselves in a category. And so what happens is sometimes in the market, you end up with these cars that are tweeners. So I'll give you a perfect example. Here's a tweener, a 997.1 in the market. Well, why is it a tweener? Well, the person who wants value in a water-cooled car, they're maybe more entry level. They're trying to get into the Porsche family at the lowest potential cost of entry is generally going to go 996. A person who prizes a little bit more modern features and amenities, they're more of a new car type buyer, but maybe on a budget, they're probably going to go 991. And someone who really prizes absolute reliability, maybe they have some concerns about IMS bearing failure, they're going to seek out a 997.2. So then what do you end up with the 997? Well, who's the buyer on the 997? It's a great car. In fact, the photo on the screen is a car I recently sold. I love 997s. They're a gorgeous car. But they're kind of right now, they're kind of a tweener. And so I think tweener cars represent an opportunity because they're just at that weird moment where the demand, I think, is as low as it's ever going to be for that model. So I think demand for the 997 in a few years out is going to be stronger than it is today. So they're just kind of caught in that no man's land, if you will. We'll call it a tweener, right?
So
So that's what I mean by models.
997.1, you're going to hit the buy button because you think it's kind of at the lowest level right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that on 997.1s, when you can buy one for about a couple grand more than a comparable 996, I think that's a good buy. You know, with all the typical caveats you would throw out there with any M96 or M97 era car. I would also lump in like the 987, be it the Boxster or Cayman. Great car as well. The Cayman's a little bit less of a tweener because there wasn't a 986 Cayman. So if you want to sort of rigid coupe mid-engine car, first gen, like our very own Damon Loney, he bought a 987 Cayman, just a base car recently in the teens, which I think is just an unbelievable car.
Smoking deal. That is a smoking deal of a car. Absolutely.
I could have referenced that as one of the deals that kind of popped up there. You know, one of the other cars that's kind of, I will call a tweener, like a 991.1 GT3. Because why is that car a tweener? Well, a collectible GT person isn't going to pursue a 991.1 GT3 right now because production values were high. They've made a lot of cars, and they're not old enough to be kind of in the collectible sphere. They're gonna lean 996 or 997 GT3. But for a person who wants to go to the track and he wants to be at the front of the pack, well, the 991.1 is no longer ultra competitive. It's certainly an unbelievable car, but it's not ultra competitive. Those guys are going to buy a .2, right? Or an upcoming 992 GT3. So now I think 991 GT3s are a value because they're kind of caught in that sort of no man's land.
That's so interesting to hear you say a GT3, any GT3 kind of in the middle of anything, because to me they just are typically the ultimate Porsche, right? So
they are a great car. The other thing we can talk about is not just models, but we can talk about qualities. So one of the things that's really hot in the market right now is you have a segment of buyers that want a true number one condition car, which if you've ever been to one of my presentations, I tell people I call those cars unicorns. They don't exist in the wild. Most people that tell you to have a 1 really have a 2 minus. But you know, the collectors and the people that are really adamant that, you know, it isn't a cost thing, it's a quality issue, they'll pay sometimes 2 or 3x market for a true number one condition car. And if you gave them, for example, a number 2 condition car for half the price, they're not interested because it's not what they want, right? So right now in the market, we have this weird segment where, like take 356s, for example. In days of yore, if you had a pretty nice condition to open 356, like this is a 356B Roadster 1960 that we're looking at here. I know this car, I'd call it a 2 minus car. It's a really nice car. It's got good gaps. It's got nice chrome. It's matching numbers. It's a very nice car, but it's not a number one condition car. Well, there's a person out there who'd rather spend $300,000 for a condition 1 car. The person who wants to buy it for $1.50 for a condition 2 minus car kind of isn't out there anymore. Frankly, the funny thing is, it's easier to, if that car were a condition 4 and it was or a condition 5 even, right? It was dented up, had some patina, had some rust, was kind of hipster, right? Maybe someone had
Mm-hmm.
pulled the bumpers off it. That would be an easier car to sell, and it would probably sell for the same money as this car that looks remarkably good,
Wow.
which almost makes no sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a demographic shift because there's a group of people that don't want to buy the shiny red with nice chrome and gaps. They want one that they can drive on 1,000-mile rally on dirt roads, and they can have some hipster stickers, and it looks really cool on Instagram, right? That's a buying demographic now, right?
Hmm.
So I think some of those cars that are kind of caught in the middle can be good values.
So we've talked about the tweeners, and we're right about the halfway mark. And if I follow my timing, we should have the winners for the raffle here come shortly. But let's move into Porsches to watch. You mentioned a few cars that the 997, no, was it 997.1 car as kind of at the bottom of the depreciating curve? And are there other cars that you're kind of watching right now?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of good values in there right now. In terms of good value for the dollar right now, for the first time in almost 10 years, I would say long hood cars are a good value. They've cooled in the market right now. And by that, I mean the 69 to 73 cars,
Mm-hmm.
particularly kind of the tweeners, the ones that are nicely done, nicely restored, but they're maybe a 2 minus. They've got a couple little nits you could pick about them. Um, it used to be you couldn't touch a long hood car without 6-figure money. And now I'm seeing some, reasonable, 71, 72, 911T cars that maybe have a few things you could knit about them, selling in the 65 or $70,000 range. I think that's a really good car for those
They're
dollars.
coming sort of
Uh,
into mortal money levels, right?
exactly. And I appreciate that because I love early cars. If you have not had the chance to drive an early car, I would encourage everyone to drive an early car. One of my pet peeves, hopefully I don't offend anyone here, but I'm not a big fan of a backdate. And the reason I'm not a fan of a backdate is every generation of 911 is great. Just enjoy it for what it is. And if you backdate a car, it generally, they're generally never perfect, but they generally can look like a different generation, but they don't drive like a different generation.
Mm.
So to me, the magic of a 70 or a 71 is how that car drives. So if I backdate an SC or a 3.2 to look like a 70 or 71, it still drives like an SC, which is a wonderful thing. It's fine, but it's this weird disconnect in my world.
Right, because
So
then
now that
then the personality of the car, it's like it has two personalities. It has a look of a classic car, but drives like a modern car, which is why people do that. But if I climb into my 87, I want it to feel like my 87. Like I don't need my 87 to feel like a modern car because that's the personality of it, and you lose that
yeah,
charm. And I think over a longer period of time, people will look back and cars that are kept as original are going to be seen as, that's why you got that car, not something that you've kind of converted. But don't
yeah.
hate me if you converted your car. I still love you, and I still love your car, and I hope you love your car.
Well, and for the
Disclaimers.
record, Boo, I have original cars and I have modified cars, so
Yeah.
I'm on every segment. I think there's some other good values out there. If we talk non-rear engine Porsches, I still think almost any generation of Boxster is a great value right now. Be that 986 Boxsters, I think are still great values. 987, 987.2s are really hard to find, but I think a solid buy. So I think those cars are good.
And I think
I
I think earlier versions, right? I mean, 97s, 98s, Boxsters, and 99 911s. Like, people are looking for them, and there aren't that many of them around.
Well, yeah, because much like the mid years and the 964s, they got such a bad rap that they, owner 4 or 5, and next thing you know, they were sold on that, buy here, pay here lot in the seedy part of town, right?
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a sad fall from grace. And interestingly enough, like on the 996, what people have discovered is that, for example, the 99 actually has some really interesting features and is proven actually to probably be the most reliable of all the 996s.
Thank you. I appreciate
So
that because I happen to have a 99.
there you go. I think that's your car, isn't it?
Let me throw out this question that that people might consider a bit out there. But the 02996, they changed up the front headlight. I don't think you'll officially hear this from anywhere, but they changed the headlight to differentiate it from a Boxster, right? The 02.
Yeah.
Do you think in today's world, an 02 is more coveted than a 99? I personally, I own a 99, so I'm going to say I love the way the 99 996 headlights look because it came from the GT1.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Boo. One of the things I was blessed to do a couple years ago is write the 20-year anniversary article for Panorama on the 996. And so I spent a lot of time looking at the design studies, and I'll be honest, I hadn't thought that much about a 996. I hadn't owned one personally. I'd sold some. And I found myself really drawn to the car. And so then I went on a mission. And then like you, I'd always preferred the 02 to 04 cars. But the more I looked at them, I thought, I like the purity of the original design. And so I hunted around and I bought myself an 01 996 Carrera 4 Coupe. I liked the original bumper design. I like, heaven forbid, to call them the frying egg if you'd like. I like the car. I think it's
I
going
like
to
fried
age
eggs.
well.
Who doesn't like fried eggs?
I also think that holds true for the original Boxster. Yeah.
Yeah. The original designs always I think they stand the test of time. Anytime they come and kind of remedy things because of complaints or add on or whatever, like I think in the long term, you kind of see that it was adapted as opposed to, as you said, the purity of the original design the first time out.
Yeah. I mean, if you think back through, we have a long history with Porsche. As enthusiasts, we modify our cars. Well, think how many models people, quote, updated back in the day because they wanted to look like the newest version. I mean, this happened across the board. In fact, I saw one just the other day. I saw, at first glance, I thought it was a 944, and then I looked at it, and it was actually a 924 someone had grafted on 944 flares, clearly back in the mid-'80s to update their car. And people did that with 928s, making them look like S4s. They took early 911s and put impact bumpers on them. Even 356 people updated them. So we have kind of a long history of thinking that the newest is the best.
Yep.
But then usually over time, what we discover is that there's a purity of original design language that holds the test of time.
Yeah, just think of how many long hoods were converted to the short hood look. And then when long hoods went through the roof, everyone was looking at bins and going, was this originally a long hood? And let's put it back to the original style, right? So, hey, let me just announce the winners. Jay Moo, you've won one of the lights, as well as Kurt. You've won, I think, the larger light. So make sure you reach out to Damon. We'll get your addresses and such, and we'll ship them out to you. So let's try this thing called Speed Round that we came up with here. We've told you that there's, let me get my board here. And we're going to ask you to give us your choice of car at the 4 different budget levels. We've got 25K, 50K, 75K, and 100, about 100. And so are you ready over there, Nathan? Let's start with the first one, and that is 25K. And what would you pick? And I'll tell you what I picked. And Robert, hold on to the pictures. Don't show them because you're giving away the answers. But I will give you my pick for the 25K, and I'm going to say a 914. And we'll come back and talk about these selections. Nathan, what did you choose?
Okay, so I picked the 987.2 Boxster. This would be the 2009 to 2012 car.
Okay, and you guys that are watching and following along, let us know what your pick is at the different levels. Okay, so our next pick is going to be at the 50K level, and I'm writing down my choice. 50K. What would you buy for 50K? Let me know when you're ready, Nathan. My 50K is going to be 996 Turbo. 996 Turbo. How about you?
Solid choice. Well, For my 50K, I'm going to buy an 84 to 86 3.2 Carrera.
Mm,
Those are a 915 car, and I'm open to coupe, Targa, or cabriolet on that
very
choice.
nice. Very nice. Okay, 75K. And this is, I'll write down my choice, 75K. Yeah, make sure you guys following along on the live chat, put your the price point and the model that you're choosing so that we can refer back to it. And so for 75K, maybe this is a little wishful thinking, but I'm hoping for a 356, probably a 356 coupe, driver condition. How about you?
Also a solid choice. I'm going to pick a 2007 or 2008 997 Turbo.
Yeah, that's a
Coupe or cabriolet.
Yeah, that's a pretty good deal for 75K. That is a lot of car. Okay, and in the big money round, 100K to spend, what would you go for? I'm writing down my choice. And let me know when you're ready, Nathan. 100 grand, people, what would you buy?
Okay.
I'm going to say 991 GT3. That's your choice?
You and I think alike, brother. Look at that.
What? Nice.
Yeah.
See, we are brothers. 991 GT3.
Solid.
Okay, so let's go back and talk about our choices. So at 25K, I chose a 914 and you chose, what was it that you chose?
987.2 Boxster.
987.2. Okay, so at 25K, a 914 that I'm going to get is obviously not going to be a number one car. It's not going to be a 914.6, but it's probably going to be a super nice 73 2-liter. Maybe not. Maybe that's a little pushing it.
You might be a little wishful there in today's market, but I think you're right. It could get you an honest car, preferably original fuel injection. I actually think the 75 and 76s are great cars. Like I'd actually preferentially rather have for that money a nice 76 2-liter. I think they're well sorted. I know some people give the bumpers some heartache.
Yeah, but you can swap those out if you wanted, right? You can swap them out.
I would just drive it. It's a great car.
987.2 car. That is also a car, lots of value for the money. I'm going to go back to our live chat here and see what people chose. For 25K, Pete Para chose a 996, which I also think is, you could get a solid car for 25 grand. Cool. All right. So at 50K, I chose the 996 Turbo. Again, another car, great car, a lot of money, tons of power. I mean, and it's a modern car. You can drive it at the track. You can drive it to go get ice cream, tours, have 450, do a little tune, have 550, 650. That's a whole lot of car in the 50K range.
Absolutely. One interesting change of it used to be $50,000 bought you an absolute rock star 996 Turbo. Low miles, original paint. I mean, bam.
Yeah, 50K for a 996 Turbo.
It gets you okay car. You just got to be a little careful. It's a little bit on the bubble of edgy.
Yeah, you have to look at them carefully to get a good one at 50K, but it's possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so your choice for 50K was that 911, and I think that car was way more expensive. What, 5 years ago?
Oh, a 3.2? No, actually 3.2s have come up. I would say that the G-body cars have really come up. A lot of people have said, well, gosh, why would I pick the 915 car versus the generally preferred G50 car? And really, it's budgetary and some personal preference. I actually prefer the 915 cars. I'm not a hater. I have both cars in my collection, but I kind of like the purity of having an original Porsche gearbox. And I think the difference in today's market is for a 915 car on a coupe, 50 grand buys you a really good car, not a rock star, but a really good car. If you're willing to go, for example, cabriolet, however, you can get an outrageously good cabriolet for $50,000 in a 915.
Let me underline that. You can get a really good deal on a cabriolet in the U.S. market, because if we travel, if we jump over the puddle here and land up in Europe, a cab car commands way more than a coupe.
Yeah, it's funny, Vu, as you know, you and I get to travel to Germany together, and our friends at the Porsche Club Germany, they think it's the oddest thing that here in America, an open Porsche would underperform, or 911, 356 open cars still outperform, but
Yeah.
911, anything in 911, if it's a drop top, other than if you buy it off the showroom floor, the open version is always worth less.
Mm,
It's crazy, but that's not the case in Europe.
yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's go to our. Let me actually. What do people look at? 50K, 997.2. Someone thought they might be able to get a 356 for 50K. That would probably be a pretty rough one at 50K. So that's why my 75K car was the 356, and I'm hoping with 75K I could get like a C coupe. Driver quality, doesn't need anything major, might not be cosmetically perfect, might show some wear on the interior, but for me that's okay. It's like a well-used baseball glove, and as long as it drives fine and is sound, I would be happy with the 356 coupe at 75K.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. I think you could get a a decent C coupe, or I might even preferentially, even though I'd prefer a C, might buy like a T5B, a 60 or 61, because they're sort of out of favor, and you
Hmm.
might be able to get a much better quality car
Why would
for
they
that
be
75.
why would that be?
Because again, they're a tweener, so
uh,
people love the aesthetics of the A coupe, right?
yeah.
They kind of consider that the gold standard for aesthetics, and they consider the C coupe the gold standard for driving because they got disc brakes and they're kind of most developed.
Mm,
So then again, the B is a great car. It just gets caught in the middle. People say,
caught in the
"Well,
middle.
I want the aesthetic of the A or the stopping power and drivability of the C, particularly the T5 because it you got to open the hood, use the fuel filler, and some of that stuff." Um, so I think they're great cars. That's probably what I would do. I vote quality versus model. Oftentimes, I'd rather
Hmm.
have a Rockstar B coupe than a so-so C coupe.
Someone online, Terry here for 75K talked about the 2012 Cayman R. That's a pretty hot ticket.
I would agree that is a good choice. If any of you guys watch, I did that video comparison on kind of the sister car, which is a comparison between the 987.2 Spider and the 981 Spider. Uh, Both great cars, and of course the Cayman R really is sort of the very connected car, the 987.2 Spider. I think either of those cars would be great. And for 75 for a Cayman R, you could get a very low mileage car with a 6 speed and the carbon buckets. That's a very solid choice, Terry.
All right, and the car that we both agreed on at 100K, 991 GT3. Man, that car is just, whew. I almost would get rid of a number of cars to combine and just own that car. That car is quite amazing for the money.
Exactly. I mean, the performance envelope of that car is spectacular. Interestingly enough, because Porsche only offered this car in the PDK, we as enthusiasts, we like to complain. But I would argue actually that the PDK is the right gearbox for that car. And I'm an avowed manual guy. I
Yeah.
mean, absolutely avowed. But I think how that car is designed and built and what it should be used for, I think the PDK is the right gearbox. And I think the thing about that car is with Porsche, with the concerns over the initial engine deliveries on those, they did a 10-year, 120,000-mile warranty on the motors. So particularly if you can get a 15 or a 16, you're not going to find for 100. But if you could find a late build 15, you have a engine warranty until 2025 for
Oh.
120,000 miles. So
Hmm.
where else are you going to buy a Porsche that has a motor that probably, dare I ask what PCNA would charge for a replacement motor on that car? It's got to be every bit of 50 grand. So I can drive that thing and wring its neck on the track, and Porsche is responsible for the repair bill. I like that.
Yeah, that car is amazing. And I agree with you with PDK. As much as I love rolling my own gears and the romance of a manual car, you have to have the right tool for the job. And on track or even at an autocross, there's folks driving PDK cars and you can tell they're just quicker. I mean, They're either because they're more focused and not having to worry about matching revs and timing their shifting, and it's also a bit of insurance. The money shift in a manual car that can be pretty
Yeah.
costly, and that's hard, if not impossible, to do in a PDK. And if you're purely about performance, your choice is PDK. If you just want to have the romance and engagement, definitely a manual car. I totally get. I want to go back up to a question Jay had, one of our winners. He was thinking of selling his 2008 911 Turbo Cabriolet Tiptronic. Will I regret it? What's your take on that?
Well, that's a great question. I think almost all of us, oftentimes when we sell a Porsche, we regret it. One of the things that keeps me busy most days is replacing. I get this call all the time. Someone says, "Oh, I had, XYZ Porsche. I miss it. Can you find me my old car back?" I mean, sometimes they get so picky they want their actual old car back, and usually they just want something similar. Some of it boils down to what else is in your garage. If it's the only Porsche in your garage, I would say you'd absolutely regret it. If you've got other great choices in there, well, you got to think about use case. Which car is bringing you the most joy at that moment. The good news about an '08 turbo cab is that they sold like hotcakes. There's a fair number of them on the market. So if you were to sell it, and a couple of years from now you decide, that was a mistake, I can likely find another one. If you were telling me that you had a paint sample Carrera GT and I wouldn't offer you the same assurance, you might find another one, right?
Yeah. And the other thing about that car is, as you said, the planned usage. When I think of an '08 Cabriolet Tiptronic Turbo, I think of it as the ultimate sort of touring car. Like, that's a car you want to hit, Pacific Coast Highway and just rock and roll. It's ultimate luxury, fast, super easy to drive. And if you have others in your household, be it kids or significant other, that want to drive or want to be engaged in the Porsche experience but not know how to drive a manual, it's a cool car. But
Yeah.
if you want to move to a different experience, sell the turbo and get something else.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we helped them. I'm not sure we helped them. I
Well,
see.
the other
That's why I'm like so amazed. You catch a lot of fish, so to speak. You catch a lot of cars, and you're able to release them back into the wild with new owners. I'm not that way. I'm not programmed that way. That's how you and I are different. I'm always kind of in the catch mode, and it's painful for me to send a car off to a new owner. So thankfully, I don't buy a whole lot of them, because it would just be an emotional train wreck for me each time I had to sell a car.
Yeah, it's not always easy. The only ones that are easy to get rid of, if I see a Porsche that someone hasn't loved, it breaks my heart and I just want it out. But when I see a good car, and it could be almost any genre of car, like I just got a 968 in, and I'm so in love with this car, I can't stand it. I literally sat in my shop and just spent an hour just looking at it. I just thought, this is the coolest car ever.
Yes, he is truly a geek, like most of us, everyone.
Yeah.
So is there, people that are in the market, right? There's usage cars, and let's say they happen to be someone that's looking for a car that they're not going to get hurt financially. That's a safe bet, right? That's a safe bet.
Yeah.
Would it be a safe bet to buy a car that's, agate gray, white, silver, or do you really have to find some kind of oddball jelly bean car? Because it seems like the market today, the jelly bean cars are the ones that are, are the sure bet.
Well, interestingly enough, the sure bets of today were not the sure bets of yesterday, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so we know that consumer taste can be quite fickle. And the other thing is, as much as I love the PCA, as much as I love the people that would log in and spend an evening bantering about Porsche, we really don't represent the broad market. We probably still only represent a small portion of the market. And so, if, for example, I'm a new car dealer, I'm going to inventory what I know sells. And
Yeah.
that may not be super sexy or exciting, but it's white, it's silver, it's black, it's gray, it
Sure.
has black interior, it's got premium package plus and the 20-inch wheels. And there's a reason for that, because that's a car someone can just come in the lot and drive off, and 2 hours later and they have a new car. Whereas us Porsche enthusiasts, we're those nerds who literally have gone on the configurator and built the car 27 different times. We
Yeah.
lay in bed and we think, okay, do we go with the deviated seat belts or not? How's that gonna? And we're gonna get the crest and the headrests. We get the leather visors, but definitely sport exhaust. Well, wait a minute, no. And then we change the color configuration 10 different times, right? We're those people.
Yeah.
But the majority of people, I hate to say it, it's their car, they like it, but they just buy what's on the lot, right? And so there's a reason for that. So frankly, if you get a pretty standard car, it's a pretty straightforward sell.
Hmm.
Um,
Because
whereas if you
because the
get
others the other ones are polarizing.
exactly,
Yeah.
I call them compromise cars.
Hmm.
I'll give you an example. Most people, at least in America, when they're purchasing something large, it's for one person in the partnership, if you will. But generally, most people that are married or in a committed relationship run it by the other. And so, if you run speed yellow by your partner, male,
Yeah.
female, doesn't matter. It's polarizing. Someone will
Yeah.
say, "Whoa, I don't mind if you have that car, but I really don't want you having a yellow car."
Right. But
And so
then
then
you
they settle on gray,
yeah.
right?
But then when they see the speed
Nobody's
yellow
offended by
car,
gray. It may not be someone's first choice. Yeah,
yeah. But when they see a speed yellow
yeah.
car, they're in love with it, right? Like my dad has a speed yellow 986 Boxster, and people just gravitate towards that car. Yeah, very similar to this one. One more question before we kind of wrap things up here is Andrew Tate want to know, where does the Targa fall in the 996 value these days?
Well, that's a great question. So, for those who are less familiar, the 996 Targa was a continuation of sort of a new era of Targa for Porsche that followed up the 993 Targa, which really is not your traditional removable center section like we had through the end of 964, but was essentially almost like a panoramic double sunroof where the actual glass roof retracted underneath the rear window. Sort of a unique design. I think that the 996 actually carried this design quite elegantly. It looks very much like a coupe, particularly in the dark colors. I like the fact that you have a hatch that opens. So I think that's a solid configuration. They have not actually performed all that well in the market. I think they're a good buy if you happen to like them. Pick one up. They don't have a ton of foibles. They do carry a little bit more weight overhead. They have a little bit more of a tendency to have some rattles and wind leaks and things like that. But overall, I think a better engineering platform than the 993, the first generation was. So I don't think they carry any sort of significant premium. Um, so it's really just if you happen to like one, I would pick one up. They are more unusual. So I think in the long term, we know rarity does drive value. I don't picture them being a rock star collectible in the future, but I think they're a really cool car.
Do you
And
do
again, if
you
you like
do
one,
you know
pick one up.
about their reliability? Like it sort of scares me when I see extra mechanisms working underneath the headliner and knowing that I may or may not have to replace things up in there.
Yeah, anecdotally, what I've seen is the 996 and 997 Targas have been much more robust than the original 993 Targas were, but
Mhm.
they aren't without their foibles. But nothing that would probably panic me away from buying it. And again, you're going to have all the same other known potential issues that any other 996 would have. So, in the grand scheme, the Targa top's not what would keep me up at night.
Hmm. Well, we are already at the top of the hour. I knew this was going to go by super quick. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I think we had our largest attended live show ever. I think we approached about 400 people. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to thank Nathan for just all your knowledge, sharing it with us. And for those of you that were hoping that we would tell the value of your specific car, I apologize. That was not the intent of the show. But I'm sure you can find Nathan at Columbia Valley Luxury Cars and send him an email, or send me an email, and we can talk about that offline. Next week is technically when we're supposed to have Tech Tactics Live, our normal schedule, but because of Thanksgiving, we're kind of debating whether or not we should have it next Wednesday and just kind of wait till we go into December. So if you don't mind, just kind of chime in. Would you like us to do Tech Tactics Live next Wednesday? And depending on the response from this crew here, we certainly have topics to talk about. But you know, if you have plans to go away for the holiday and it's going to be quiet, it's okay to skip it too. So let us know if you'd like for us to have the show next Wednesday. And with that, I hope everyone is safe and healthy. And until next time, we'll see you later. Thank you, Nathan.
Thanks for having me.